know, days of the Drucker Forum are an irritating habit of making you rethink what you thought you knew. So I came here with some ideas I was going to share with you, and then I had to listen to these very stimulating panels yesterday, and I've changed my mind. That's the way it goes at the Drucker Forum. But it brought to mind, listening to the panels yesterday, a conversation that I had with somebody in New York who phoned me about 3 months ago. And he was the recruitment manager for a large international group. And he said, we have a problem, he said. We've been doing an autumn round of universities and business schools and so on. We've identified some very exciting people, he said. And as you know, we offer fantastic salaries and conditions, he said. Problem? None of them seem to want to join us. What's going on? I said, well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? You've identified, likely stars, sexy people. But they're guerrilla fighters, and you're a regimented army. They don't want to join you. Why should they? You're boring. It reminded me of my own life. I started off joining the great Shell International company, and after I'd been there about 9 years, they offered me, they told me that my next job was going to run a bit of West Africa, based in Liberia. Unfortunately, they didn't talk to my lately acquired wife. And not only did she not want to go to Liberia, understandably perhaps, but more importantly, she said to me, I didn't realize that I was marrying the sort of man who let other people tell him where to go, what to do, would tell him to learn what they wanted him to learn, and would ask him to measure his life in terms of careers in Shell. Did you know you were that sort of man? Well, she is here today. And Shell is a distant memory. So I understood what those young people were saying to my multinational group. They wanted to shape their own destinies. They did not want to have their destinies shaped for them, however well-meaning the organization was. They wanted to step outside. And listening to the panels yesterday, of course, it is much easier for them to do that now. Added to which, the big corporations are no longer such safe havens as they were in my day. So perhaps they're not losing that much. But why is it easier? Because all these new organizations that have sprung up, mostly in Silicon Valley, starting with eBay, then Google and Facebook and, all the ones you saw listed yesterday. It's interesting, isn't it? None of them produce anything. They just facilitate other people to produce things, which is fantastic. No organization like that before. Amazing. Changes the world, I really do believe. And so they can go forth and they can do things from these platforms. They're like diving platforms on which they will spring forth into the world. There are, of course, some problems in doing that. I mean, if you want to be fully human and shape your own destiny, the technology is now allowing you to do that. And that is the wonderful thing. On the other hand, how do you know how you will shape your destiny? What will it be? How can you make up your mind to those sorts of things? Do you know yourself well enough? I was brought up I was brought out with a shock not so long ago. Well, actually, about 10 years ago. I was at my wife's a photographer, and she was exhibiting some of her photographs at a place in southern England. And I was wandering around, hanging around as I do in these days, while she took the show. And somebody came up to me and he said, "Lovely photographs, aren't they?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." And he said, "Is Charles Handy here as well as his wife?" And I said, modestly, "Indeed he is, and I am he." He looked at me up and down for a long moment, and then he said, "Are you sure?" And I said to him, "That's a very good question." Because, I don't know what impression he had of me or where he got it from Google or wherever. But I'm not the same person as I was 10 years before. And I'm probably not the same person as I would be in 10 years' time if I'm still alive. So who am I? What could I be? What is my potential? That's the first question that these people have to ask as they turn down the offer of this great organization to tell them who they are and what they should do. Now, I believe, I've written in this book you've got, that everybody has a unique something, which I call the golden seed, something that is very special to them. And if they could find what it is, or somebody can tell them what it is, and if they fertilize it and water it, that's their unique human contribution to the world. I mean, you may not know it until you're quite late in life. Sometimes people never discover it. Many people never, ever discover it. And you see them, in their 80s, 90s, moaning away that they've never done anything with their life because they never discovered that thing. It's sometimes a teacher can tell you what it is. Sometimes your first boss. Sometimes you discover it late in life. Sometimes your mother knows. When I was leaving to go to Southeast Asia to work for Shell, my mother, who I don't think understood what my job was, she thought I would be in a petrol station pushing things in the car. Clearly disapproved, but she never said anything. But as I got into the car to drive to the airport, she said, "Never mind, dear. It'll be great material for your book." "Book?" I said, "Mummy, I'm not writing a book. I can be an oil executive." "Yes, dear," she said. Well, 20 years later, my first book was published. Maybe she knew something that I didn't know. Maybe your mother knows. I don't know. But you will have a unique thing. And that's what you should do if you're going to be on your own, shaping your own destiny, using the new technologies. And that's wonderful. But what about the people who actually don't join this new world out there, stay in those big organizations? There are quite a lot of them still, though there will be fewer in the future. They too should have a chance to develop their own destiny. And part of the management job in this new age, surely, is to allow them to do that, to give them as much of a chance to fulfill their destiny as the organization has to fulfill its. There is a balance. That seems to me the real social responsibility of business in the digital age. I'm looking at that tagline, managing in the digital age, and managing has two meanings, doesn't it? One is managing the corporation, making things work better. But also managing has a more colloquial sense, as when you say, "Did you manage to do the cooking today, dear? Did you manage the children? Did you cope, in other words?" And for a lot of people outside the organization, managing the digital age means getting by, coping. But in the corporation, of course, it means giving people a chance to be fully human. Now, that's not easy. The temptation, as you know, in this great digital age, is to do some helicopter managing, which is as dangerous as helicopter parenting. You know, hovering over, because you can know minute by minute in real time what everybody's doing, where your kids are, but also what your subordinates are doing. And actually, I believe that transparency, helicopter parenting, helicopter managing, is the enemy of creativity, because people don't want to take risks anymore, you know. You don't want to say what you think, because what you think can actually be broadcast instantaneously around the world, as many people have discovered. Free speech is actually not free anymore. It's dangerous. It's a great pity that they can't. I mean, my first job in Shell, out in the Far East, they gave me, without much notice, the job of running the marketing company in Sarawak in southern Borneo when I was 25. So they sent me off to this little country. It's about the same size as Portugal, only it's got rivers instead of roads, and it's got jungles instead of vineyards, you know, but quite a big country. And there was I. I grew up, I learned Greek and Latin. I knew nothing about business, nothing about Sarawak, nothing about oil, but Shell believed in learning by immersion, so there I was. And I arrived and I discovered there was no telephone line to head office in Singapore, which was terrifying. So there was nobody I could ask for help. Eventually, of course, I discovered that was a blessing in disguise, because I had to ask the people on the job for help, given that I knew nothing. And secondly, I could make mistakes and correct them before anyone back there could find out. And I tell you, I made many mistakes, but I learned a lot. And some of the mistakes weren't mistakes. They were actually very good. Now, you can't do that now, because somebody is watching you day by day, minute by minute, if they want to. Please, please, if you are managing in the digital age, don't helicopter manager. Leave people alone to make mistakes. Leave them alone, because that's how you learn. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, back with our friends who are out there forging their own destiny, managing in the digital age, there are some problems which I hope we can discuss. One is, how do they acquire the skills to do this managing in the digital age, since they won't be taught them in the big organizations? I believe that our education is no longer fit for purpose, certainly in my country, and I suspect in yours. It's has long educated people for roles in institutions. Those institutions, particularly the institutions of business, are gradually disassembling. More and more people are going to be on their own, and we're giving them no training in that whatsoever. When I went to school, I was taught the answers to closed problems, problems that had an answer in the textbook. My job was to learn what was in the textbook and repeat it out of memory 3 months later. I discovered when I left education that all the problems in the world were not closed, they were open. A closed problem is, how far is it from Vienna to Berlin? It's got an answer. An open problem is, why do you want to go to Berlin? An open problem is, why should I marry that woman? An open problem is, should I go into this market? An open problem is, what is my destiny? I discovered when I got into the great big wide world that all the problems were open problems. There was no textbook for most of them. And I wasn't trained to cope with that. So my first appraisal said, cannot take initiative, does not take decisions on his own. Well, of course not. I was trained not to. Anyway, so I believe education needs to be reformed. Second big problem which we can discuss. These people are now going to make up a large segment of the workforce, the people out there forging their own destiny in the digital age. They're not going to make much money, most of them. They'll have a nice lifestyle full of rich relationships. They may be very happy and content with a lower level of living, as I can understand might well happen. But I promise you they will not be paying tax, because they won't be making enough money. Britain is already discovering that our employment has gone up by leaps and bounds in the last 4 years. And our taxes have gone down. And our productivity has gone down. And they don't understand in the government why this can be. It's fairly obvious, isn't it? People are out there. You know, Airbnb is very exciting, but it doesn't make, well, what are the productivity statistics? We don't really know how to measure it. And they certainly don't make enough money to pay tax. And if they do, they're not going to tell anybody. So, government has a big problem. How is it going to finance the future if that's the way the world is going? And how is it going to educate the people out there? Items for discussion. Thank you very much.